Jacob's ladder, a way of seeing. Part 1. The ambient wrongness. Something is wrong, and you already know it. Not argued, felt. The explanations explain everything except the things that actually matter. You move through a world that late modernity insists is merely mechanical. Atoms and void, stimulus and response. The random walk of matter through meaningless time. And yet, you cannot bring yourself to live that way. You recoil at cruelty. You fall in love. You want your life to mean something. These are not conclusions you argued your way toward. They are givens you cannot escape. I was never fully convinced by either side of the late modern religious divide. Boomer atheism, new atheism, scientism, procedural materialism felt thin. It explained mechanisms while quietly borrowing moral intuitions it could not justify. It spoke confidently about truth while denying any ontological ground for meaning, hierarchy, or value. The world it described did not resemble the world as actually lived, patterned, symbolic, morally charged, recursive. Yet boomer theism often failed for a similar reason. Despite its religious language, it frequently shared the same materialist assumptions as its secular counterpart. God was treated as an object within the universe, rather than as the ground of being itself. Faith became a matter of historical proof or moral instruction, while symbolism, ritual, beauty, and metaphysical depth were minimized or treated with suspicion. Both camps, despite their opposition, had been flattened by the same modern assumptions. Both had lost the vertical. J.P. Marceau, a philosopher and contributor to Jonathan Peugeot's publication The Symbolic World, uses the zombie as a diagnostic image, not as insult, but as recognition. The zombie moves, consumes, reacts, but there is no interiority, no soul. It is the philosophical zombie made flesh. All mechanism, no meaning. Modern materialism does not merely describe humans this way. It slowly forms them this way. You become what you believe you are. The cultural obsession with zombies is not accidental. It is a civilization dreaming about its own condition. And yet, you sense it too, don't you? The wrongness. The way the materialist frame cannot account for your own experience of being alive. The suspicion that something has been lost, or hidden, or simply unseen. Part 2. The crack. For a time, I would have described myself as agnostic. At worst, that was the label I used, but the description never quite fit. I was a cradle Catholic, confirmed, and though belief felt intellectually unsettled, the Catholic identity itself mattered in a way that went deeper than argument. In moments of real distress, when abstractions fall away, my instinct was never disbelief. It was prayer. It was trust. Looking back, it seems clear that belief was present before articulation. Or perhaps more accurately, belief existed at a level deeper than conscious argument. What obscured it was not conviction, but immersion. I was swimming in late modern materialism. How could I not be? We all are. Its assumptions are ambient, not argued, absorbed before they are examined. The first rung of the ladder is not argument. It is recognition. The rungs are not always equally visible or equally easy to grasp. For some, the first rung is beauty, a piece of music, a sunset, a face that stops you. For others, it is moral horror, the intuition that certain acts are wrong in a way that transcends social convention. For still others, it is love, or longing, or the simple fact that they cannot stop asking, why are we here? But once one rung is grasped, The others begin to appear. You already act as if meaning is real. You recoil at evil. You love someone and it matters that you love them. You experience beauty and it stops you. You want your life to be for something. These are not philosophical positions you adopted after careful deliberation. They are the bedrock upon which you stand even while your official metaphysics denies that any such bedrock exists. The crack in the materialist frame is this. Why do you live as if meaning is real while believing it isn't? This is not a gotcha. It is an invitation. The gap between metaphysics and lived experience is where the latter touches ground. Part 3. The ladder appears. During my university years, like every other young man with an internet connection and a vague sense that something was missing, I ended up watching Jordan Peterson lectures on YouTube. The algorithm served them up. I kept clicking. Peterson led to Jonathan Pajot, his frequent collaborator, the one who always sat at his right hand in their conversations. The orthodox icon carver who spoke about symbolism as if it were more real than the news. At the time, they existed as background noise. They gestured toward myth, narrative, and symbolism, but I lacked the framework to fully receive what they were pointing at. My attention was directed elsewhere. Institutions, civilizations, political orders, the long arc of historical causality. I was studying history, and history felt concrete in a way that talk of archetypes did not. It was only after that formal grounding, after history had done its quiet work, that I returned to these ideas with seriousness. What had once sounded suggestive now demanded sustained attention. The patterns they pointed to, hierarchy, sacrifice, ascent and descent, narrative meaning, were no longer speculative. They matched what history itself reveals when taken as more than a sequence of events. Pajot was accessible. That mattered. Through him, I was able to build up the frame and then enter more difficult reading material. He functioned as a threshold, an entry point that made the deeper tradition legible. I met someone standing on a rung I could reach, and he pointed upward. Through Pajot, Plato became less alien. The Stoics made sense. Orthodox theosis stopped sounding esoteric, and suddenly I was reading primary sources that would have bounced off me 5 years earlier. What ultimately distinguished Pajot was that he treated symbolism not as psychology or metaphor, but as ontological. Symbols were not decorative overlays placed onto a neutral world. They were disclosures of how reality itself is structured. This recognition did not arrive suddenly. It took time for understanding to catch up with intuition. Tracing this vision backward only strengthened it. Plato and Aristotle understood reality as ordered, hierarchical, and intelligible. Heraclitus spoke of the logos as the hidden order governing flux. The Stoics recognized a rational structure pervading the cosmos. These were not poetic gestures, but serious claims about how being coheres. What made this convergence convincing was that it was not confined to the Western tradition. In classical Chinese thought, the Tao functions in a strikingly similar way, not merely as a moral path, but as the underlying order through which reality holds together. Different civilizations, separated by geography and language, perceived the same mountain from different sides. Eastern Orthodox philosophy reinforced this recognition. Its emphasis on participation, liturgy, iconography, and theosis preserved a vision of reality largely untouched by modern flattening. Though I remain Catholic, Orthodoxy clarified how much of the modern religious imagination had quietly abandoned metaphysics in favor of moralism or historical literalism. The latter was not something I constructed. It was something I stumbled into and then had to name. The perennial vision does not belong to Pajot or to Peterson or to any single thinker. It is the worldview of our ancestors. It is the worldview revealed by Scripture. It is the structure of reality itself, waiting to be perceived again. Part 4. Science placed, not rejected. This worldview does not reject science. It places it. The symbolic and logos-centered understanding of reality fully affirms that material processes occur according to material causes. Evolution happens. Quantum mechanics describes real physical behavior. Chemistry, biology, and physics do genuine explanatory work at their proper level. Nothing about symbolism requires denying any of that. What it rejects is the modern confusion of mechanism with meaning. Evolution explains how organisms change over time. It does not explain why intelligible form, hierarchy, and purpose appear at all. Quantum physics describes the probabilistic behavior of matter. It does not explain why reality is mathematically intelligible, ordered, or capable of being known. These sciences describe motion within the world. They do not account for the fact that the world moves intelligibly in the first place. The moment the critic retreats to "science cannot explain meaning, therefore meaning is illusory," he has conceded the point. He is admitting that the deepest questions lie outside the scientific method. This is where modern materialism quietly overreaches. It takes a valid explanatory layer and inflates it into a total worldview. What thinkers like Pajot clarify, often disarmingly, is that these scientific debates are simply not the most important frame. When asked about evolution, his response is telling. He doesn't really care. Sure, it happened. But it doesn't touch the deeper question of meaning, hierarchy, or logos. Arguing endlessly about mechanisms while ignoring metaphysics is like obsessing over how bricks are fired while refusing to ask why a cathedral exists. Here is the deeper irony the materialist rarely confronts. The symbolic worldview was the historical precondition for scientific inquiry itself. Modern science did not emerge from a vacuum. It emerged from the medieval synthesis, from a civilization that believed reality was intelligible because a rational God had made it so, that the cosmos was ordered by logos and therefore accessible to reason, that nature was worth studying precisely because it was not divine but created, a gift to be understood rather than a god to be appeased. The scientific revolution was born from the perennial vision, not against it. Copernicus was a cathedral canon. Kepler sought the mathematical harmonies of creation. Newton believed he was reading the mind of God. The very confidence that nature would yield to rational inquiry, that experiments would be repeatable, that mathematics would map onto matter, this confidence was theological before it was empirical. The materialist who dismisses the symbolic worldview as pre-scientific is sawing off the branch he sits on. His assumption that reality is intelligible, ordered, and lawful, this assumption was given to him by the tradition he now rejects. He has inherited the fruit while despising the tree, and the fruit is beginning to rot. The replication crisis now plaguing the sciences, the discovery that a staggering percentage of published studies cannot be reproduced, is not a mere methodological hiccup. It is the predictable result of a scientific culture that has lost its grounding. When the belief that reality is inherently intelligible and ordered is abandoned, when truth becomes just another social construct or funding incentive, the enterprise begins to eat itself. The sciences still function, but on borrowed capital, and the debt is coming due. In a symbolic framework, the heavens also move. Material causality operates horizontally within the created order. But there is also vertical causality, form, purpose, participation. The ancient insight, shared by Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, medieval Christianity, and classical Taoist thought, is that reality is layered. Lower levels move according to higher principles, even while remaining genuinely free and contingent within their own domain. Evolutionary processes can be real and directed toward intelligible ends without being micromanaged. Quantum indeterminacy can exist and be held within a meaningful order. This is not God of the gaps. It is God as the condition for there being gaps, laws, probabilities, and intelligibility at all. Modern science excels at describing motion. Symbolism explains why motion is ordered, why form persists through change, why patterns recur, and why consciousness can recognize meaning rather than merely register stimuli. The symbolic worldview answers scientific questions without being threatened by them. It does not compete with science. It outgrows the false choice science was forced into during the modern period. In that sense, affirming evolution and quantum physics is not a concession. It is expected. The world is genuinely material, but it is not merely material. The logos is not another force inside the system. It is what makes the system intelligible at all. Part 5. The music of the spheres. I used to run the track at night, listening to audiobooks about medieval cosmology and C.S. Lewis's vision of reality. I could look up at the stars and see it, the music of the spheres, dancing mathematics and physics, truth, beauty, goodness, all cohering. The intellectual framework was no longer merely argued, it was perceived. This is the moment the latter becomes visible. I was doing something ordinary, running, listening, and the vertical axis disclosed itself. I did not climb up to find it. It was already there. I simply became aware. In Genesis, Jacob sleeps on a stone in a place he did not know was sacred. He sees a ladder reaching to heaven, angels ascending and descending. He wakes and says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He names the place Bethel, the house of God. But here is the insight the image carries. Everywhere is Bethel once you can see it. Creation is sacred. The ordinary is saturated with meaning. The latter does not stand in only one location. It is the structure of reality itself. The angels ascend and descend everywhere, always. The question is whether we have eyes to see. And yet, some places are more soaked with meaning than others. This is not contradiction, but hierarchy. Wherever the Eucharist is consecrated, wherever transubstantiation occurs, heaven and earth are more densely joined. The sites of martyrdom, the relics of saints, the places where holiness was lived and died, these are thresholds where the latter is more visible, where the veil is thinner. The sacred is everywhere, yes, but it is not everywhere equally. To say otherwise would flatten the very hierarchy the latter reveals. Part 6. The descent sanctified. The latter does not terminate in escape. The vision is not Gnostic. You do not climb up and leave matter behind. You ascend to see the logos, the order, the music of the spheres, and then you come back down and build. Churches, families, businesses, technologies, discoveries, children. The vertical vision authorizes and sanctifies horizontal action. The angels do not only ascend, they descend too. That is the whole point of the image. Jacob wakes up, sees the ladder, and what does he do? He does not float away. He sets up a stone, makes a vow, and gets on with his life. But now he knows where he is, the house of God, which is everywhere once you can see it. This is what separates the perennial vision from world-denying spirituality. The ascent is not about escaping the material. It is about seeing the material rightly, and then returning to act within it with full knowledge of what it is. Participation in the liturgy, going to church, building community, raising families, starting businesses, inventing technology, doing science, discovering new things, having children. The worldview sanctifies all of it. Blood, sacrifice, ascent and descent, doors and thresholds. These patterns persist not by cultural accident, but because they correspond to the structure of being itself. They are true. Part 7. Objections. You may object. Consider what a truly lived nihilism would look like. If nothing matters, why not do monstrous things? Why not do nothing at all? Why not descend into madness? These are the logical endpoints, and almost no one arrives at them. The few who do, the sociopaths, the mass shooters, the utterly despairing, are universally condemned. We call them monsters. We call them sick. But wrong according to what standard, if nihilism is true? The materialist does not live his materialism. He loves his children as if that love were real. He rages at injustice as if justice were more than a word. He builds, hopes, strives, all actions presupposing a meaning his metaphysics cannot provide. When the secular humanist protests injustice or recoils at evil, he acts as if there is a universal standard, even while his metaphysics insists these are merely adaptive behaviors or social contracts. The very act of caring about truth presupposes the vertical axis he denies. The replies circle back on themselves. The vitalist says he is merely following nature, evolution, adaptive behavior. But then his meaning structures are arbitrary, and he cannot condemn the nihilist who follows different instincts. Yet he does condemn. The mimeticist says the patterns that promote survival simply stick. But this concedes that meaning is useful fiction, which returns us to nihilism. The relativist says no perspective is privileged, but he does not live that way. When wronged, he protests. When the shooter opens fire, he is horrified. Relativism is parasitic. It can only exist in a society that does not believe it, freeloading on the symbolic order it denies. Every exit loops back. The nihilist cannot live his view. The vitalist cannot justify his condemnations. The relativist cannot stop himself from condemning. The trap closes. The patterns that survive across every civilization, sacrifice, hierarchy, love, the sacred, survive not because they are arbitrary, but because they correspond to something real. They are discoveries, not accidents. There is the pragmatist shrug. I do not need to answer these questions. I simply live. But this refusal is not a counter-argument. It is a symptom. Remember the zombie, all mechanism, no interiority. When the materialist claims he does not need to respond to the vertical axis, he confirms the diagnosis. Modern materialism has slowly formed him to be blind to meaning. His refusal is not philosophy, it is the disenchantment made flesh. And then there is Nietzsche, the one who did not shrug but fought. He was no materialist. He despised the flatness of scientific reductionism as much as he despised Christianity. But he saw how powerful the latter was and tried to destroy it anyway, to philosophize his way past good and evil, to demolish metaphysics itself. He knew what he was up against. He went mad in the attempt, spending his final conscious moments signing letters, the crucified one. You cannot make war on the source of meaning and remain whole, but most are not Nietzsche. The only coherent response an ordinary modern materialist could give is to live his materialism to its logical conclusion. Almost no one does. In practice, most retreat to selective blindness. living as if meaning is real while insisting it is not. The ladder is there whether we name it or not. Part 8. A way of seeing. Over time, these strands coalesced. What emerged was not an identity adopted under pressure or a belief chosen for comfort, but a worldview, one in which meaning is real, hierarchy is unavoidable, and symbolic patterns recur because they correspond to the structure of being itself. I believe this worldview now consciously, deliberately, not because I was raised into it, nor because it resolves anxiety, but because, so far as I can tell, it corresponds to reality. It explains more with fewer evasions. It accounts for beauty, suffering, order, and transcendence without flattening them. In that sense, belief was not something newly acquired, but something recovered, clarified after years of living inside assumptions I had never been asked to question. The disenchantment of modernity is a lie we have been living inside. Meaning is not something we project onto dead matter. It is the structure of being itself. The ladder is real. The angels move. And you already know this. You have simply been trained to unsee it. Look at what you are already doing. When you sacrifice for your children, you are enacting a pattern older than civilization. When you create something beautiful, you are instantiating form you did not invent. When you feel awe at the stars, you are receiving. When you build something meant to outlast you, you are participating in an order that transcends you. When you love, you are channeling fire from a source you did not light. You think you are operating alone, on flat ground, by your own power. You are not. You are pulling from the ladder. The angels are already assisting. The question is whether you will see it. The question is not whether to climb. You are already on the ladder. The question is whether you will open your eyes.